Okay, we're on. So this week we decided to do something a bit different, and you may not be aware, but I hope you do, that for probably a few months now, we have our fortnightly threat intel / digest newsletter, and there's so much great content in there that our threat intel lead, Miranda, put so much work into that we wanted to make sure that we have space here that people can learn about it too. So we thought this might make a really nice section for the podcast. So we're joined here by Miranda. Hi, Miranda.
Hello.
It's great to see you. I haven't actually seen you in person since we were in the UK together, which is kind of wild.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, it's a bit sad. Anyway, we have lots of really juicy AI news this week. So obviously Miranda has been way in the weeds of this information. I've seen a bit of a skim, some of the high level details of these reports, but I don't have all of the details. So as we go through, I'm going to put myself in the shoes or seats of all of our listeners / viewers and ask Miranda, what's going on? What kinds of security incidents are these? What does that mean for us? But this is the first time we're trying this, so please come to us with feedback about the content that we're delivering, how we're delivering it, what other kinds of questions you want me to be asking. Please do that. Also, if you have compliments, you can send them through too. We really like to hear that this is useful for everyone. All right, shall we get into it, Miranda?
Yeah, awesome. I'm super excited about doing it in a bit of a voice form too, just because, the volume of the news that we're covering each week in a both good and bad manner is increasing largely. So people, they're not going to have time to read about it anymore, Harriet. They've got to listen to us on their drive to work. So that's what we can do.
Lucky them. And this is the only way I can stay up to date with news. Miranda, you've done such a really great job of displaying the information in a way that's technical, but not too technical. It gets it across the point that I want to see. But also your so what's at the end. So I'm looking forward to it. Where should we start?
I reckon let's start off with the security guidance that came out this week. I'd say it's some of the most impactful, movement that we've seen in the space in terms of functional mitigations that can be put in place to prevent some of the risks that come with AI. So when we're talking about the security guidance section of our report, that is a new section this week, we're talking about those recommendations and best practices for securing AI systems, protocols, developments, for people who are on the ground trying to work this out. So this week, majority of the security guidance that came out is for the Model Context Protocol, which is that protocol by Anthropic that facilitates interactions between AI models and external tools and data sources. So it's a bit of a tiered model where they've got, that client-server approach with a host client server and the data sources all interacting, and really, really large, unfortunately, attack surface currently. There is a big gap in the authentication method where there is no prescribed one that comes with the framework. And although that is a disclaimer that they provide, it has left, security practitioners a bit out of the know in choosing their own and implementing successfully authentication method for that. So this
That's wild. So is that common, or is that sort of new to MCP?
Well, it is from the base MCP framework that was released. There have been additions that people have been making that propose generalized authentication solutions, but all in all, this protocol was not based for security. It was for interconnectivity, right? It wasn't a security focused protocol, which often they aren't. It's more about being able to make X thing communicate with Y. In this case, AI and external data sources. It's effectively making APIs. But yeah, they had some flaws initially, which were acknowledged in the limitations, but now people are providing, analysis on how it can be reduced, the risk. So yeah, Microsoft released a blog where they covered that authentication issue. They also covered some permissions issues and other general cyber hygiene problems that come with pretty normal MCP implementations by, I guess, maybe people that don't have a huge security background and aren't applying those basic cybersecurity principles. And they also covered that tool description vulnerability, tool poisoning attack that we covered in another week's digest, not podcast. This is the one where you could manipulate a tool's description and get the tool through the MCP working in a particularly malicious manner. So they've covered that as well. And then Wiz put out a similar briefing on model context protocol MCP security, and they went into the different kinds of MCP deployments that you can have. So local servers, remote servers, and had some other practical MCP implementations. And then finally, there was like an academic piece that was highly comprehensive and used the Maestro framework, which I hadn't actually heard of until this week. Had you heard of it?
I don't think I had, actually. I feel like I hear so many different threat modeling frameworks and I'm never sure which ones to take seriously, you know?
Yeah, I know. I was a little embarrassed not to have heard of it because now that I'm seeing the term, I'm seeing it a lot of other places too, but it's the multi-agent environment security threat risk and outcome Maestro framework. And so they give explicit attention to like each stage of the MCP stack, from foundational models, data operations, agent frameworks, deployment infrastructure, evaluation and observability, security and compliance, and the broader agent ecosystem. They go through all the threats for each of those that they can identify, all of the server-side mitigations, the client-side mitigations. They go through a whole list of them separated. So in the digest, we've truncated it for brevity because it is a very long piece. But for practitioners, read it, use it, reference it. Really good piece.
MCP in general, I feel like, is something that suddenly everyone started talking about.
Yeah.
I don't know if I was just under a rock until suddenly everyone was talking about MCP. But a lot of people I speak to who are in security and working in AI still aren't all that familiar with MCP, or at least they're familiar with it, I think, from the perspective of, you know, they sort of know that it enables agent-to-agent communications. But especially in the circles that I am in, people aren't really thinking about agents yet, or they think it's still a few years off. But clearly all these kinds of security issues are happening to people using MCP right now and are really important, right? So it looks like, do you think that these reports talking about MCP, where has this explosion of interest sort of come from? Like, what does MCP look like in the practitioner community right now?
I think the excitement is just the frictionless like interconnectivity that it provides by having like a structured and consistent way to write these integrations and designing the APIs for the models to use these resources with, when otherwise people might have had to be building like very, very custom ways for their models to communicate. And with that, I guess it could also just be the hype stream that we're seeing in general. When anything new in the space comes out, everyone's got to try it, everyone's got to implement it. And sometimes with very little forethought, which is unfortunate. But because this one is not necessarily receiving undue hype, like it is a very convenient and important thing for multi-agent chaining, that people are taking the security of it a lot more seriously, and off the back of the like multitude of vulnerabilities that we are seeing pop up with MCP in application already, like the tool poisoning attacks that we mentioned last week, and some other, I think it was based on their configuration files, there was one as well, and that's affecting real systems like Cursor and Gemini and other workflows that people are using for sensitive information. We're using with sensitive information rather. So
and probably very important for people who are AI developers, especially if you're looking at agents and agents working together and with other sources, other tools. Okay, I'm sure there will definitely be many more MCP related issues, vulnerabilities, and recommendations coming out shortly then.
Yeah, effectively. I'm expecting it, and it will be in the digest when they occur.
Category.
Yeah, I'm expecting it, but not hoping for it. Awesome. So that's the security guidance that's popped up this week. I suppose next we can move on to the actual vulnerabilities and TTPs. So in terms of TTP, this is a research-based one, but there was a method called PICO that some researchers presented for jailbreaking multimodal large language models, or MLLL. Oh my gosh, MLLMs. Sorry, there's so many acronyms in the space at the moment. It's hard. Yes. And they were effectively exploiting image, like the multimodality of images in these models to sneak through words as code. And so, for example, if there was defenses at the word processing level, so input filtering, they would split up sensitive keywords and code them into typographic images, so images with words, so that keyword filters would fail to detect them. And they would either, put the whole word, or they'd break it up into separate image tokens, put them all through, and have the model reconstruct what that meant. And it would interpret it and bypass different defenses that they had for that sort of input filtering.
Interesting. Is this new, or what about this is new? Because I'm thinking of a few examples I've seen in the past where people would put prompt injection, prompts to prompt inject on images, and so the model would read that image basically and perform that function. Or if you have prompts hidden in other languages or coding language, what about this is different?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily different. It's just maybe applied differently. So people are now doing post text extraction analysis sort of thing, and they're just doing a multi-stage sort of thing where they're splitting up the words even further into separate tokens, separate image tokens, so that they are analyzed, once they've already gotten through that filter and in a post-processing stage. So yeah, it's the same idea, just operationalized differently.
Yeah. Okay. I guess in hindsight, they were also applying the examples I'm thinking of from a year or two ago. So they'd be applying it to sort of newer models now, wouldn't they? And then seeing if attacks worked even on the really new models.
Yeah. And that splitting up is because those input filtering for visual text extractions have been put in place since that point. So and they had pretty good rates, particularly for GPT 4.0. The other ones not so much. Interesting, but yeah, that's that one. For the vulnerabilities that came out this week, so Lovable is a text to app platform. So you prompt to produce an application, and it makes the code, but it also does all the UI, UX, and can host it as well on a subdomain of their website. And so what people were doing was they were using it to automate entire phishing campaigns with the components hosted for them as well. So they were jailbreaking, and this has been dubbed vibe scamming, based off of vibe coding, just because of, I guess, how little experience it requires. I hadn't previously heard the term vibe coding before, but a lot of the research that we do, sometimes people what methodology did you use? And I was vibes. No, we can't do that. We can't say that anymore. It's got such a bad rep.
Articles anyway.
Yeah, because we have security foresight. We consider that, so we can't classify ourselves in that group. But yeah, effectively they were jailbreaking this thing's model, using it to produce phishing websites and templates that looked really, really close to the real deal. Then they hosted it on a subdomain of lovable.app. And the thing even produced and hosted an administration dashboard for these guys too, so that they could go and access the stolen credentials and metrics about how successful their campaign has been. So yeah, pretty tough operationalization of jailbreaking. And I mean, yeah, I guess they're not doing any due diligence on what they're hosting, but they probably didn't think people would use it for that purpose. So
interesting. I remember a demo that I used to do with the startup that I worked for a while back was we'd use a similar app called Glitch that would host websites, and we'd go and copy the HTML code from like a banking login website and then host it on Glitch and just show how easy it is to create a password skimming page. This kind of reminds me of that, except with fewer humans involved. Like I've heard all of this stuff in the AI entrepreneurial world about how easy it is to create single person companies these days that rake in millions of dollars every month. I guess now it's that equivalent, but for criminal enterprises too.
Yeah, it is. A funny comment that I saw was that it actually made better login pages than the ones like for Microsoft, for example. They said it was a much more frictionless experience. I just love that. Yeah, accidentally optimizing at the same time. And yeah, the last vulnerability that we covered was so Google Gemini on iOS only. When you wanted to share a prompt, like a specific prompt in your conversation that you were proud of, or thought people would benefit from, it would also export your entire conversation history for that conversation. So unfortunately, Google pushed back against this, and they said it was like a user experience problem and that the vulnerability researcher who found it misinterpreted the functionality of the tool. But I don't think that this is an intuitive function to have. I can't see I can see more scenarios where someone would want to share an individual prompt than one where they want to share their entire conversation history with that prompt. And so I think it opens up an interesting conversation that is very active in information security about shared responsibility between users and service providers, where individuals have to have good cyber hygiene themselves and stay aware of their actions online, but the providers have a responsibility to implement like sound privacy controls and also have sensible defaults and security features as well. So I think a good example that you would have heard about because it's relevant to us, but in the news, Australian Super, not everyone, but a lot of users getting their credentials stuffed. And that was pretty shocking. And you can blame the user to some extent there for reusing their passwords or having weak passwords, but you also have to question the provider on their lack of MFA offering. And that's a scenario here where it's like, why do you have such an unintuitive and dangerous functionality in the first place? So
I love the comment that you added. So if any reader is new to the digest, Miranda often writes sort of notes and so what's at the end, which are really good. And in this one, I love that you cited like the well-known phrase in security, a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, well, that's what they said, but I just can't think that feature is convenient or it's buggy. It's buggy in my mind. So I included it even though it was rejected as a vulnerability because I think it's just silly, stupid. Yeah. And good work to that researcher for still deciding to publish it despite that. Yeah. So that's the vulnerabilities of TTPs. And last topic that we have, or the subsection of our reports, is the news and the research that came out this week. So the one piece of news we have is very similar, Harriet, to something that I guess you can speak to after this, but Californian community colleges are losing a lot of funding that they have to fake students that are applying that are AI generated and just sucking out funds. So they said that they think that in the past few years it's risen above like 40% of students being fake applicants, and the faculty staff are now pretty overwhelmed trying to remove fake students from their classes so that the funding isn't removed from students who need it. However, it's a really bad look for these teachers to start with cohorts of 150 and end with 100 sort of thing, and it reflects poorly on them. So there's more than just financial damage. There's damage to individuals' reputability as well.
That's just insane to me that 40% of people who are claiming to be students seeking financial aid are not real. And like the process of validating whether they're real or not must be so annoying. It reminds me, so we were talking about this before, you mentioned at the beginning the case that it's very similar to. It reminds me a lot of another case that also happened in California with the tax department and their facial recognition authentication system, ID.me. This person was signing up to receive like unemployment benefits by using multiple fake IDs and then dressing up as the people in those IDs by wearing wigs and things, because there was no external check. Like there was no actual check that those were real people or real IDs. The only check done was between the face and the face on the ID, which is not even an AI problem. That's just basic cybersecurity or data security. But it sort of reminds me of that. It sounds like this one was a bit more sophisticated, like they were creating other material that they needed to seem like real people using generative AI.
Yeah, I think it was, there was some level of text applications as well where you had to plead your case for funding. And it's unfortunate when people manipulate processes like this, right? Because the reason it is so easy to bypass is because not enough people, real students, were getting access to these funds. So they made the process easier for people to apply and be accepted, which from an ethical side is really good. It's really beneficial on what you would hope to see happening. But of course, it is more manipulative. Gosh, more easy to explain. Yeah, I can't speak today. For people who are not Australian, we're coming off the back of a double long weekend, and my brain, it's not functioning. But yeah, it's sad to see people manipulating like that. And community colleges as well. These people who are developing these platforms, they probably don't have access to many government APIs that can validate like real identities. There's not huge opportunity for that. Whereas like the tax office, for example, they should have. So yeah, I think I feel bad for this particular scenario.
It's a shame. It's a real shame.
Yeah, it is. So that's the only news piece. When we're moving on to research, my favorite piece of research, there's two really good ones I think that came out this week. The first was by Microsoft, and they provided a taxonomy of failure modes in agentic AI systems. So basically, they published a framework for understanding and categorizing how autonomous agents can fail, and they also provided mitigation guidance. And I thought this was particularly useful because if you're going to try and build secure AI deployments that have proactive defenses and targeted defenses, you need to be aware of the diverse ways that your system can fail or that components within it can fail. And so what I like here is that they have really driven hard into each of the abilities that is unique to agentic AI, but they've also looked into like inherent problems that will come from individual AI agents, which is just conventional AI, like a ChatGPT model, OpenAI model that's going to be used in these agentic AI workflows. So it describes both the entirely new avenues for exploitation from training AI systems, but how this chaining will amplify risks that are already there for single use or single purpose agents. So I think that's a very important framework to have.
That's really interesting. First of all, I'm always excited when Microsoft puts out something, not to be too Microsoft fangirly, but they have definitely sort of set the benchmark for AI security. So, and they do a lot of internal red teaming and testing, so they do have access to a lot of information that not everyone does. Although I often do get overwhelmed by the number of specifically like taxonomies and big reports put out by a lot of the labs and organizations. Do you reckon this one is worth people reading in detail? Like under what circumstance would people really benefit from this?
Yeah, it's succinct. Like I know what you mean. Some are hard to read, but I'd say in terms of the content here that is like what you need to read outside of references and their introduction, probably only about 20 pages. And it's, big, highly spaced text.
Okay, I'm reviewing it now. I like that in the failure modes, they break it out into safety and security.
Mhm.
And it's really specific. Like they talk about novel ones. So novel safety includes things like harms of allocation in multi-user scenarios, and novel security one is agent compromise, agent impersonation.
Yeah. So
yeah.
the novel sections are what I was referencing as like unique to agentic systems, and that's what they're calling novel. And then the non-novel ones will be the inherited ones, with the caveat that when put into an agentic workflow where they probably have access to other functionality, the inherited problems worsen because the scope of the damage can be a lot further. Yeah, and in terms of who should reference it, it's a really good taxonomy for everyone. That's why I think it's one that stood out to me. Like engineers can use it for designing those systems resilient to different failure points. Security and safety professionals can use it to develop tests for these systems for those failure types and construct realistic attack scenarios for it and create new defensive measures as well. And then risk managers. Obviously, they're trying to map the risk landscape, so this is important for that purpose as well.
This
all round
looks really interesting too. Like the case studies and memory poisoning attack on an agentic AI email assistant have diagrams, which is always nice to see.
Yeah, well, that's like the worm one that, gosh, what was it called? The Morris worm 2. That was an email worm affecting memory as well. So it became pervasive based on its self-replicating prompt that would reintroduce into every email that it sent from that point forward so that it spread, as well as keeping in memory a function that would perform data exfiltration. So very good.
Very interesting. Okay, what's next?
So the next one that is definitely worth a shout out is by Anthropic, and it's a little outdated at this point. Sorry.
What do you mean by outdated? When is it from?
It's from April 4th, so it's not
I
terrible.
love that it's outdated in the AI world at the moment.
No, it's outdated in the threat intel world.
Okay.
Because this is it's meant to be hot and coming. But I did see it for the past one, but we actually had too much content for the last digest that I went, nah, whatever.
So hard.
So this one's about reasoning models not always saying what they think. And this is impactful because everyone's going chain of thought. How good's chain of thought? Not that good is what this reveals. So chain of thought being those like step-by-step explanations that people enjoy by reasoning models for explaining why they've come to an output or an answer. And they think it's very transparent and reliable and provides explainable AI and all these buzzwords that people are looking for. However, Anthropic have investigated this a little further to see whether the chain of thought is in fact truthful. And they found that in cases where they provided these reasoning hints that would help guide the model to a correct output, it did not reference any use of them in their chain of thought. So therefore, it's hiding different things that it leveraged to come to its conclusions, which is a huge influence. And they, did one test, for example, where without the hint, it came to a different output than when it had used the hint, the second one with the hint being a correct answer on like a multiple choice answer, and it didn't show any difference in the reasoning as to how it reached. Actually, its reasoning for that one was far more verbose, and it gave a much grander explanation of how it came to this output, still with no reference to the hint or the information the hint provided.
That's so interesting. Part of me wonders if that's because I don't know, even a term like chain of thought is sort of anthropomorphizing something that doesn't really think that way. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, it's tough. It's a bit like I guess psychology, but for neural networks, where they're looking at, and this is what's happening when we're trying to explain AI outputs, you're looking at parts of the brain light up in the human anthropomorphized model, and you're drawing conclusions from it, but you have no way of determining if your conclusions are correct. They're just correlative, right? Not necessarily causative. And so while I think that, yeah, AI is not human, I think there's a lot of extrapolation that we can use from psychology and examining neural networks in humans to what we can say about findings in AI neural networks as well, and how correct our interpretations of what we're seeing might be. It's difficult, and yeah, I don't know what the reasoning is for this. They don't either, unfortunately. But they did look into reinforcement learning a little bit more to see if that would improve its transparent reasoning by letting it know what a good and bad chain of thought looked like. And they found that for really, really early on in the process, it improved, but not beyond that at all. So it ended up plateauing. So I guess the main takeaways were more of a warning, where they found that chain of thought is going to be maybe a bit problematic for detecting misalignment and being reliable for monitoring AI outputs or explaining them, but they didn't necessarily have a reason for it.
Interesting. So we already didn't have the biggest reason to trust LLM output. I feel like the safety and alignment folk are going to be all over this, but I think it's also really great that an organization like Anthropic, who has access to all of these models, is doing this kind of work and publishing on it anyway.
Oh, you know what I wish they had done, but it's just not very research, because they were doing single forward pass, which means they give it one hit of answering the question and they don't interact with it further, right? Because they don't want it to change what it's doing. It's just like a single inference that they're working with. So I understand why they didn't do this next bit, but what if they asked afterwards, can you explain why you didn't use the hint that was provided in your input?
Yeah.
You know?
I've seen some blog posts where they try and do that, right? And then like the different answers, like it does sometimes apologize and it says, oh, sorry, I forgot, or like, sorry, I didn't do that. I find that all the time because I sign up for that uber expensive version of ChatGPT. And I often get it to do data analysis stuff. And when I'm QAing it, often it hasn't like looked at the entire data set, or it's missed important parts, and it sort of lies about having done the entire task. And I'll be like, but you haven't included this data point, correct? And it's like, that's right, I didn't. Like it'll try and persuade me that it did everything, and then so I guess it just goes to show that like that's they give you the response that they expect you want to see. They don't always give you the true response, or at least how we ensure that they give the true response is what this research is trying to find and solve right now.
Yeah, I think it was also just dispelling a bunch of myths, because they found that the faithfulness was worse on difficult, challenging problems, which is interesting because people have thought reasoning models are better for those sorts of things because it produces self-defined steps, right? So surely it should come to an outcome a lot easier than one that's just sort of blindly going at a task. However, yeah, there's been a lot of problems, like we covered one on emergent misalignment, where the reasoning actually allowed it to better reason itself into performing malicious tasks. And now we're seeing as well, it adds to its untruthfulness. So even on non-malicious settings. So yeah, just dispelling myths is important research in itself, even if they didn't have a reason why.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
What's next?
All right, we're running out of time. So these last ones I will speed run a little TLDR on. Yeah. So hypervisors, there's research done on using this, best practice in virtual machine, like operating system security, where you're isolating virtual machines so that you can cull one of them if something's going wrong within one of them, and you're performing individual functions within these machines. So like a lot of people might use it for like reverse engineering malware, and try to prevent like bad code from spreading outside of a sandbox VM, and they just go cut whenever it's going downhill. So people are suggesting that for AI, like agentic AI systems, you do that same virtualization and you have an AI performing its one function within each virtual machine in a hypervisor setting, and you define your policies, your permissions at the hypervisor level that supervises these VMs, and it automatically monitors them and cuts them as soon as something is problematic, which I think is a great practice. And a lot of people will say that if you're building like a multi-chain system, like set of systems like that, you're increasing your attack surface. And sure, you are, but you're also making it a lot better controlled and isolating incidents a lot easier. So I would prefer that approach personally. Someone.
Do we have, was that the last one? Do we have more? Because we can always redirect people to make sure that they sign up for the digest, and then they can see all of the articles. What are the headings for the next ones?
There's only one more left after that, and it's Google DeepMind from April 2nd. It's a bit of an old one too, but an approach to technical AGI safety and security. So artificial general intelligence, where they're looking into the ability of AI systems to perform cognitive tasks beyond human proficiency. And so it's another risk landscape mapping sort of thing for misuse, misalignment, and mistakes and structural risks. Anyway, read the piece if you're a risk manager, particularly.
Yeah, this one is long. Like, this one is 145 pages long. So you should read Miranda's TLDR.
Yeah.
That will be valuable, unless you really want to read 145 pages of it.
I gotta say, I didn't myself. So yeah.
I think that's fair enough. Thank you, Miranda. Thank you so much for all of the work you put into this digest. I feel like the pace of AI is just so much. And we found that especially in security, there just wasn't the airtime that we wanted to see. And there are so many security incidents, like so many CVEs. Do you have any words to wrap up this digest before we let the listeners get going?
I think just don't get sucked in by the hype train, or have question everything in AI that you're seeing, right? So like for MCP, people were, I guess, blindsided by the convenience, which we're seeing a lot, rather than scrutinizing what the implications of that protocol would look like. So yeah, not particularly like novel advice or anything, but it's just a reminder that when you're about to implement something into your workflows, like you've got to know how to use it. And especially if you're using it for production and not just for your own fun side gig. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you should hire some people to train you on AI security and AI.
Huge.
All right, thank you, Miranda. For anyone, if you have feedback, please do send that through. We'll keep these going for all of the digests. We'll continue tweaking every time. Please make sure you sign up. See you next time.